In the morning, on a Thursday, I was sure that it was a waste of time. I remember finishing an egg and cheese croissant from Dunkin' Donuts, brushing the flaky crumbs off my beige dress slacks, and cursing the GPS for leading me down a gravel washboard road in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. I was a cynic, a rationalizer, a man who had seen hundreds of false alarms from angry neighbors and bitter ex-spouses. I thought about how to finish the inspection quickly, check the boxes on Form 10 to 40, and get home in time for dinner. I did not know that the moment the tires of my service Ford Taurus crunched on the gravel of the Henderson driveway, my old life was over. I drove there to close a case, but instead, I opened a door to hell. The drive itself was an exercise in sensory deprivation. I had left the county office in Raleigh at 7:15 a.m. to beat the I-40 traffic, but the congestion around Durham had already thickened into a sluggish river of brake lights. My sedan, a 2013 Fleet model that smelled permanently of stale French fries and industrial upholstery cleaner, hummed with a low-grade vibration that made my teeth ache after the first hour. I was listening to a podcast about economic theory, something dry, something safe. I needed that detachment. After 5 years in Child Protective Services, you learn to build a wall between your empathy and your job. If you let every bruised arm or malnourished toddler touch your soul, you burn out in 6 months. I was a survivor. I was the rationalizer. My colleagues called me Teflon Tom because nothing stuck. I looked for facts. I looked for the caloric content in the pantry, the temperature of the water heater, the square footage per child. Evil was not a monster to me. It was non-compliance with State Statute 7B 300. By 9:30 a.m., the landscape had shifted. The generic strip malls and Chick-fil as of the suburbs gave way to the rolling, verdant claustrophobia of the rural Piedmont. The trees here were aggressive, loblolly pines and oaks that crowded the asphalt, their branches creating a tunnel effect that messed with the satellite reception. My Waze app flickered, the blue line spinning in a void of gray grid lines. GPS signal lost, the robotic voice announced, sounding remarkably unconcerned about my isolation. I checked the printed directions on the passenger seat. Left on County Road 1102. For miles to Dirt Access Road. I took a sip of my coffee. It was lukewarm now, that specific, acidic temperature that Dunkin' coffee reaches after 2 hours in a cardboard cup. I grimaced and swallowed it anyway. The caffeine was a necessity. I had slept poorly the night before, a recurring issue involving the humidity in my apartment and a noisy HVAC unit, and my eyes felt like they were packed with sand. I turned onto County Road 1102. The asphalt immediately degraded into a patchwork of tar snakes and potholes. The Ford S suspension groaned in protest. Outside, the temperature was climbing. The dashboard display read 78 degrees Fahrenheit, unseasonably warm for April. I rolled the window down an inch to let out the recycled air conditioning smell. But the air outside was thick, heavy with the scent of wet clay and blooming kudzu. It was a smell I associated with childhood summers. But here, mixed with the smell of diesel exhaust from a passing logging truck, it felt oppressive. I checked my watch. 10:14 a.m. I was 14 minutes behind schedule. I hated being late. It gave the foster parents a psychological upper hand, a reason to be aggrieved before I even stepped out of the car. I pressed the accelerator, pushing the sedan to 50 miles per hour on a road designed for 35. The trees blurred. The radio signal died completely, leaving only the white noise of static. I turned it off. The silence that rushed into the car was sudden and absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the tires on the uneven road. I began to mentally rehearse the checklist. Refrigerator temperature must be below 40 degrees. Separate beds for each child. Working smoke detectors. No visible hazards. It was rote memorization. A shield. I told myself this was just another standard welfare check. The anonymous tip had been vague. Something about too many kids working outside and strange hours. In rural counties, seeing kids doing farm chores was not abuse. It was culture. I was already drafting the unfounded report in my head. Subject home was inspected. Children appeared healthy. Labor was consistent with agricultural lifestyle. Case closed. I reached for my bag on the passenger seat, fumbling for a pack of spearmint gum. I unwrapped a piece, the foil crinkling loudly in the quiet car. The sharp, artificial sugar taste hit my tongue. It was a grounding technique. Taste the mint. Feel the steering wheel. You are here. You are doing a job. Then I saw the turnoff. It was not marked by a sign, but by a rusted mailbox painted a dull, matte black. No numbers. Just a mailbox sitting crookedly on a rotting cedar post. The dirt road beyond it disappeared instantly into a wall of forest so dense it looked like a green curtain. I slowed down, the gravel crunching beneath the tires like breaking bones. I turned the wheel. The car dipped violently as I left the pavement, the undercarriage scraping against a ridge of hardened mud. Okay, I whispered to myself. My voice sounded thin in the enclosed space. Let us get this over with. The driveway was 3 miles long. That detail had not been in the brief. 3 miles of winding, single-lane dirt track that felt less like a road and more like a scar cut through the woods. The deeper I drove, the darker it got. The canopy overhead was so thick that the sunlight filtered through in sickly, greenish beams, illuminating swirling motes of dust in the air. My phone lost all service bars. No 3G, no LTE, just no service. I felt a prickle of irritation. If I needed to call my supervisor, Angela, to clarify a regulation, I'd have to drive all the way back out. Around mile 2, the atmosphere shifted. It's hard to explain to someone who has not worked in the field, but you develop a hum in your head when you approach a home. Usually, as you get closer to a family dwelling, the world gets louder. You hear dogs barking, distant lawnmowers, the hum of power lines. Here, the silence grew. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, watchful silence. The birds had stopped singing. The wind did not seem to penetrate the tree line. The only sound was the Ford's engine and the popping of gravel. I cracked the window further. The smell changed. The kudzu scent was gone, replaced by something earthier. Fertilizer? No, sweeter. Rotting hay and bleach? It was a faint chemical tang cutting through the organic decay of the forest. It reminded me of the janitor's closet in my elementary school, industrial cleanliness masking something dirty. The woods finally broke, opening up into a massive clearing. The Henderson property. I stopped the car for a moment, letting the engine idle. I wanted to take it in before they saw me. The house was a farmhouse, white-clapboard, probably built in the mid-50s. It was imposing, 2 stories with a wraparound porch that sat in deep shadow. To the left, a massive red barn with peeling paint. To the right, fields of tilled earth stretching back towards the tree line. But it was the stillness that hit me first. It was 10:45 a.m. on a Thursday. There should be noise. Even with homeschooled kids, there is life. A tricycle in the grass. A basketball hoop. A dog sleeping on the porch. There was nothing. The yard was manicured with military precision. The grass was cut so short it looked like green carpet. There were no weeds. No dandelions. No toys. Weird, I muttered. I grabbed my clipboard and my ID badge, clipping it to my belt. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Tie straight, hair combed, professional. I eased the car forward, parking next to a pristine 2015 Ford F-150. As I turned off the ignition, the engine ticked as it cooled. I stepped out. The heat hit me like a physical weight. It was significantly hotter here in the clearing than in the woods. The sun beat down on the red clay dust. And then I saw them. In the field behind the house, about 50 yards away, figures were moving. I squinted against the glare. Children. There were 8 of them. They were spread out in a perfect line, advancing across the tilled soil. They were bent at the waist, their hands working the dirt. They were not playing. They were weeding or planting, I could not tell. I walked toward the porch, my dress shoes dusting up with red clay. I kept glancing at the kids. They had not looked up. Usually, when a strange car pulls into a rural driveway, kids stop. They stare. They point. These children did not break rhythm. Bend, pull, toss, step, bend, pull, toss, step. It was mechanical. I reached the porch steps. The wood was old but freshly painted a glossy gray. I raised my hand to knock on the solid oak door, but before my knuckles could make contact, the door swung open. It was not a sudden motion. It was smooth, controlled, as if she had been standing directly behind the wood, waiting for my shadow to cross the threshold. Linda Henderson was a small woman, maybe 5 feet 4 inches, wearing a floral print dress that seemed ripped from a 1950s Sears catalog. She had an apron on, pristine white, not a spot of grease or flour on it. Her hair was a helmet of stiff, graying curls, sprayed into immobility. But it was her eyes that triggered my rationalizer brain to start firing rapid explanations. They were blue, pale, and watery, and they were wide. Too wide. She was smiling, but the smile did not reach those eyes. It was a muscle contraction of the lower face, separate from the rest of her expression. "Mr. Reynolds," she said. Her voice was like syrup poured over gravel, sweet, but with a rasp. "We've been expecting you." I blinked. I had not given a specific time, only Thursday morning. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, flashing my badge. "James Reynolds, Child Protective Services. I am here for the routine compliance check regarding the anonymous report we received." I watched her face for the tell, the flinch of guilt, the flash of anger, the nervous glance back into the house. Nothing. She did not blink. "Of course," she said, stepping back and holding the door open. "We have nothing to hide here. Please, come in out of this heat. Can I get you some lemonade? Freshly squeezed." "No, thank you," I said automatically. Accepting food or drink was technically allowed, but I avoided it. Created a social debt. I'd like to start with a tour of the common areas, if that's all right. "Certainly." I stepped inside. The temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly. The air conditioning was humming powerfully somewhere deep in the house. The interior confirmed the unease I felt outside. It was devoid of life. The floors were hardwood, polished to a lethal shine. The walls were painted a neutral cream. There was a sofa, 2 armchairs, and a coffee table. But there was no clutter. I've been in hundreds of homes with 8 kids. There is always clutter. A stray Lego, a backpack, a scuff mark on the wall, a smell of laundry detergent or teenage body spray or peanut butter. This room smelled of lemon pledge and nothing else. "You have a lovely home," I lied, scanning the room. "Where are the children's personal items? Books? Toys?" Linda clasped her hands in front of her apron. Her knuckles were white. "We believe in a clutter-free environment, Mr. Reynolds. Order in the home, order in the mind. The children keep their personal effects in their footlockers upstairs." "Footlockers," I repeated. "Not toy boxes, not shelves. Footlockers. It teaches responsibility," she added, her smile tightening by a millimeter. "I saw the children outside," I said, moving toward the kitchen. "It's 11 o'clock a.m. on a school day. Can you explain why they are not engaged in coursework?" "That is their coursework," Linda replied smoothly, following close at my heels. I could hear her orthopedic shoes squeaking on the hardwood. "Botany, agriculture, discipline. We find that physical labor grounds the children. Many of them come from chaotic backgrounds. The rhythm of the farm heals them." It was a rehearsed answer. I could tell by the cadence. She had said this before. I walked into the kitchen. It was large, farmhouse style with a massive butcher block island. Again spotless. Not a dish in the sink. "I need to see the pantry," I said. "Of course." She opened a tall cabinet. It was stocked with military precision. Cans of beans, corn, soup, all labels facing forward. Bags of rice. And the refrigerator? She opened the stainless steel fridge. Gallons of milk, eggs, vegetables. It was perfect. Too perfect. It looked like a stage set. "Mrs. Henderson." I turned to her. She was standing too close. I could smell her perfume now. Lilac and something metallic like old pennies. "I need to interview the children. Individually. In private. For the first time, the smile faltered. The corners of her mouth twitched. Individually, she asked, "Is that necessary? The children, they have separation anxiety. They function best as a unit. I am afraid separating them might cause distress." "It is state policy," I said, my voice firm. "I need to speak to each child alone, to ensure they feel safe to speak freely." She stared at me. The silence in the kitchen stretched out, heavy and suffocating. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to get louder. "I see," she said finally. Her voice had dropped an octave. The syrup was gone. "Well, if it's policy." She turned to the back door. "I will call them in." She did not yell. She did not ring a bell. She just opened the back door and stood there. I looked out the window. The children, 50 yards away, stopped working simultaneously, as if they were connected by a wire. They turned, dropped their tools, and began to march toward the house. Single file, heads down. My stomach turned over. This was not discipline. This was programming. Note: in this retelling, the Night of Terror encompasses the deepening investigation and the psychological spiral of the narrator later that evening, staying in a local motel because he could not bring himself to drive home yet. I spent 2 hours interviewing them. It was the most disturbing 2 hours of my career. They sat in the kitchen chair one by one. Linda stood in the dining room, just through the archway. Technically, she was out of the room. Practically, she was right there. "Do you like it here?" I asked the oldest boy, a 14-year-old named David. "Yes, sir. It is a good home." "Do you get enough to eat?" "Yes, sir. We are well fed." "What happens if you break a rule?" A pause. A micro glance toward the dining room archway. "We are corrected, sir. We learn to be better." Every child. The same answers. The same flat effect. The same dead eyes. It was like talking to ventriloquist dummies. But it was the girl, Emma, who broke the script. She was maybe 13. When I asked her about her hobbies, she shifted in her chair. She looked at the archway, then at me. Her hand, trembling slightly, moved to the edge of the table. She slid a folded piece of paper under my notebook. She did not say a word. Her eyes were screaming, terrified, pleading, but her mouth said, "I like sewing, sir." I palmed the note. I felt the sweat on her paper. I finished the interviews at 1:30 p.m. I did a walkthrough of the upstairs. The bedrooms were barracks. For bunk beds per room. Tightly made. Footlockers at the end. No photos. No posters. I left the house at 2:00 p.m. Linda stood on the porch watching me. She did not wave. She just watched. I drove until I hit the paved road. Then I pulled over onto the shoulder. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I unfolded the note. It was written in pencil, the letters jagged and rushed. "Check the root cellar. They keep us there when we are bad. Please help." I stared at the paper. Root cellar. I had not seen a root cellar. I looked at the clock. 2:15 p.m. I should go back. I should turn the car around, demand to see the cellar. But fear, cold, irrational, primal fear, gripped me. If I went back now, alone, with no cell service, what would happen? Linda's face, that mask of calculation, floated in my mind. And Raymond, I had not even seen the husband. Where was he? I needed backup. I needed Angela. I drove to the nearest town, a place called distinctively Comfort, and checked into the only motel, the Pine View Inn. It was a dump, musty carpet, flickering neon sign, but it had Wi-Fi. I called Angela. "You need evidence, James?" she said, her voice tinny through the bad reception. "A note from a kid is not enough for an emergency removal. Kids make things up. We need cause." "Angela, they were robots," I hissed, pacing the small, stained motel room. "Es a cult. Or worse. And the root cellar. Go back tomorrow with the sheriff if you want," she sighed. "But do not go cowboy on me. Write the report tonight." She hung up. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress. The sun went down. The motel room plunged into gloom, lit only by the parking lot lights outside. I opened my laptop. I started typing the report, but I could not focus. The image of those kids in the field kept replaying. Bend, pull, toss. I started digging. I pulled up the county archives. Henderson, foster license approved 2005. I began to cross-reference the children. 2006, Michael Trent. Transferred. 2007, Sarah Jenkins. Transferred. 2008, Timmy O'Neill. Runaway. I opened a second tab. Google Maps. I looked at the satellite view of the farm, the house, the barn, the field, and there, near the back of the kitchen, a bulkhead door, covered by what looked like a rug or a tarp in the satellite image. The root cellar. I went back to the list of children. 47 children in 12 years. I started searching for them on social media. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Michael Trent. Nothing. Sarah Jenkins. Nothing. Timmy O'Neill. Nothing. My heart started hammering against my ribs. In 2017, a 20-year-old has a digital footprint. Even a small one. A MySpace page from 2009. A tweet. A mugshot. Something. These children did not exist. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. The room felt freezing, though the AC was off. I heard a car door slam outside in the parking lot and I jumped, my heart seizing. I went to the window and peered through the blinds. Pickup truck had pulled in. A Ford F-150, white, just like the one at the Henderson Farm. I could not breathe. That's a coincidence, the rationalizer whispered. That's the most common truck in America. But the driver did not get out. The truck just sat there, engine idling, headlights cutting through the motel parking lot fog, pointed directly at my door. Number 104. I backed away from the window. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob. I turned off the lights. I sat in the corner of the room, between the bed and the wall, clutching my laptop. I listened. The sound of the truck engine was a low growl. Then, heavy footsteps on the concrete walkway. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. A whoosh-whoosh sound that drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. The doorknob rattled. Just once. A metal clack. Then silence. I did not move. I did not sleep. I sat there for 6 hours, staring at the shadow of the door, waiting for it to burst open. I imagined Raymond Henderson, a man I had not met but imagined as a giant, breaking through the wood. I imagined Linda with her apron and her dead smile. I realized then that the horror was not ghosts. It was not monsters. It was the system that had sent 47 children to that house. The system that required me to have proof while children were locked in a cellar. At 3:00 a.m., the truck started up again. It backed out and drove away. The sun did not rise so much as the darkness just dissolved into a bruised, purple bruise of a morning. I had not slept. I had sat in that corner, laptop battery dead, phone clutching 12% charge, listening to the plumbing of the Pine View in groan and shudder. At 6:15 a.m., the housekeeping carts started rolling. The sound of plastic wheels on concrete was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. It meant the world was restarting. It meant witnesses. I stood up. My legs were numb, asleep from the hips down. I had to massage blood back into my calves before I could walk. I moved the chair away from the door. My hands were trembling, a low-frequency shake that made fumbling with the deadbolt difficult. I opened the door. The parking lot was bathed in the gray light of a heavy, overcast day. The air was thick with humidity, 98% saturation. I looked at the spot where the white Ford F-150 had been parked. It was empty. You imagined it, the rationalizer in my brain whispered. It was just a contractor. Coincidence. You re-overtired. You re-hysterical. I stepped out onto the concrete walkway. I looked down at the welcome mat in front of room 104. There, stamped onto the worn AstroTurf, was a boot print. A single, heavy lug-soled print. And it was not mud. It was red clay, the specific, iron-rich, blood-colored clay of the Henderson Farm. It was dried and flaking, which meant they had stood there for a long time. Listening. Waiting. I did not pack. I threw my clothes into my duffel bag, grabbed my laptop, and ran to my car. I drove 90 miles an hour back to Raleigh, checking my rearview mirror every 4 seconds. Every white truck made my heart seize. I stopped at a gas station in Wilson, not to get gas, but to vomit into a trash can. I made it to the office by 8:30 a.m. I bypassed the coffee station. I bypassed the morning huddle. I went straight to Angela's office. "I need a warrant," I said. I did not sit down. Angela looked up from her paperwork, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Good morning to you too, James. Did you get the report done? I need a warrant for the Henderson property. Today. Now." "James, we talked about this. We need prob. I have probable cause." I slammed my hand on her desk. It was the first time in 5 years I had raised my voice at a supervisor. 23 children are missing, Angela. I ran the names last night. They did not transfer. They did not age out. They vanished. And last night, someone from that farm tracked me to my motel and stood outside my door. Angela stared at me. She saw the dark circles under my eyes, the red clay dust still on my shoes, the tremor in my hands. She took her glasses off slowly. "Sit down," she said, her voice quiet. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. Getting a warrant based on missing data is harder than you think. The bureaucracy is designed to assume incompetence, not malice. Lost files are common. Clerical errors are expected. Murder is not. We needed a witness." For the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost myself. I worked 18-hour days. I stopped eating real meals, surviving on vending machine crackers and lukewarm office coffee. I built a spreadsheet that looked like a conspiracy theorist's wall lines connecting foster placements, dates of transfer, and social security numbers that went dormant. I focused on the runaways, the ones who had supposedly fled the Henderson Farm. If you run away, you eventually surface. You get a traffic ticket. You apply for a job. You get arrested for shoplifting. You show up in a hospital database. I tracked 17 runaways. 16 of them had zero activity after the date they left the farm. No credit checks. No DMV records. Nothing. But number 17, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah had run away in 2013 at age 16. According to the Henderson report, she had stolen $200 and a bicycle. I ran her social security number through a LexisNexis search, a paid database we usually only used for background checks on parents. Pinged. A Sarah Mitchell, born on the correct date, had applied for a SNAP benefit card in Richmond, Virginia, 3 months ago. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked. It was the only sign of life in a sea of dead data. I did not call. I did not email. I got in my car and drove 3 hours north to Richmond. The address on the SNAP application was a rundown apartment complex near the industrial district. I waited in the parking lot for 6 hours. It was raining again. The wipers of my Taurus slapped back and forth, a metronome counting down the seconds. At 4:45 p.m., a young woman walked out of the building. She was wearing a waitressing uniform, black pants, white shirt. She looked older than 20. Her posture was hunched, protective. She walked with her head down, eyes scanning the pavement. I got out of the car. "Sarah?" I called out softly. She froze. She did not turn around. Her shoulders went rigid. "Sarah Mitchell?" She turned slowly. When she saw my lanyard, the generic government ID, she flinched so hard she almost dropped her purse. Her eyes went wide, filled with that same animal panic I had seen in Emma's eyes at the table. "I'm not going back," she whispered. She backed away, her hands coming up defensively. "I'm 19. You see not make me go back." I aged out. "I'm not here to take you back," I said, keeping my distance, hands visible. "My name is James Reynolds. I visited the Henderson Farm 3 weeks ago." At the mention of the name, she stopped breathing. Literally stopped. Her face drained of color, turning a sickly, translucent gray. "I saw the root cellar. I lied. I know about the room behind the wall. It was a gamble. A massive, dangerous gamble. If I was wrong, she would think I was crazy. But I was not wrong. Sarah's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the wet pavement, not fainting, just losing the strength to stand. I rushed forward, not to grab her, but to kneel beside her. They said they find me, she sobbed, rocking back and forth. They said they have eyes everywhere. Are you one of them? Are you one of the uncles? No, I said firmly. I am the man who is going to burn that place to the ground. But I need you to tell me where the bodies are, Sarah. She looked at me then, and in her eyes, I saw the end of my skepticism. The rationalizer died in that parking lot in Richmond. They are not just in the cellar, she whispered. They in the corn. The raid happened on May 23, 2017. We did not go in with a knock. We went in with a Bearcat armored vehicle and the SWAT team from the State Bureau of Investigation. I watched from the command post, a tent set up at the edge of the property line. It was 5:00 a.m. The sky was bleeding red in the east. When the tactical team breached the front door, there was no resistance, no shootout. Raymond Henderson was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Linda was folding laundry. They did not look surprised. They looked annoyed, like we were interrupting a minor chore. The children were removed first. All 8 of them. They walked out in that same single file line, hands behind their backs. Even as the SWAT guys tried to comfort them, tried to wrap blankets around them, they marched. They were terrified to break formation. Then the search began. I walked into the house with the forensic team. The smell was the same. Lemon pledge and underlying rot. Show us, the lead detective said to me. I walked to the kitchen. I pointed to the rug. Move it. 2 officers pulled the heavy Persian rug aside. Beneath it was a hatch padlocked. They cut the lock with bolt cutters. The sound rang through the silent house like a gunshot. The officer pulled the door open. The smell that rose up was not just mildew. It was ammonia, feces, and fear. That's a chemical smell, fear. It smells like copper. We went down. The root cellar was exactly as Linda had described it at first. Shelves, canned peaches, potatoes. But Sarah had drawn us a map. Behind the shelves on the north wall, I said, push on the 3rd support beam. The detective pushed. The shelf swung inward on hidden hinges. Beyond it was a void. I shone my flashlight into the darkness. It was a cell. Dirt floors, dirt walls, no windows. In the center of the room was a single wooden post with iron ring bolts driven into it. Chains lay on the floor. There were buckets. There were sleeping bags, stiff with filth. And on the walls, scratch marks. Not from animals. From fingernails. Thousands of them. I saw a name scratched into the hard-packed clay near the floor. Amanda. I had to leave. I walked back up the stairs, out the kitchen door, and into the fresh air. I fell to my knees in the pristine grass and dry heaved until my ribs ached. But the horror was not over. At 9:00 a.m., the cadaver dogs arrived. They did not go to the barn. They went to the field. The beautiful, manicured field where I had seen the children working. The dogs alerted almost immediately. The excavation took 2 weeks. We found them wrapped in plastic tarps. We found them in wooden crates. For bodies, Amanda, age 14, Timmy, age 9, and 2 others so decomposed they had to be identified by dental records. The work the children were doing, the weeding, the digging, they were maintaining the graves. They were forced to farm over the bodies of their friends. Raymond and Linda Henderson were convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder, 12 counts of kidnapping, and 30 counts of child abuse. They are currently serving 4 consecutive life sentences at the Polunsky unit. They never testified. They never apologized. During the sentencing, Linda just stared at the judge, that same flat, polite smile plastered on her face. As she was led away, she looked at me in the gallery. She did not blink. She just nodded. A small, grandmotherly nod. I quit Child Protective Services 3 days after the trial ended. I live in the city now. A high-rise apartment on the 14th floor. No basement. No yard. I have a security system that costs more than my car. I try to tell myself it's over. The rationalizer in me, what's left of him, says that justice was served. The bad guys are in a cage. The surviving children are in therapy. Sarah is studying to be a paralegal. But I see not sleep. Because of the math. 47 children entered that home. 12 survived and testified. 4 were found in the ground. 16 were verified as safe in other placements, after months of digging. That leaves 15. 15 children who are just gone. No records. No bodies in the field. We dug up every inch. No digital footprint. The Hendersons were part of a network, the prosecution argued. A network of off-the-books adoptions for people who did not want to go through legal channels. People who wanted children for labor. Or for other things. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I think about that white Ford F-150 at the motel. I think about the boot print. Raymond Henderson was in jail when that truck visited me. Linda was in jail. So who was driving the truck? And where are the other 15 children? I check my locks. I check the closets. And I never, ever buy Dunkin' Donuts coffee on a Thursday.